Hello, everyone. Welcome to this information session on the final implementation plan for the transition to the updated EPEAT criteria. My name is Catherine LaRock, and I am the Senior Manager of Eco-Labels and Resources here at GEC. I know how busy everyone is and appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Please know that while we are holding 3 sessions to facilitate participation by stakeholders in different geographic locations, the exact same information is being presented in each of the sessions. So participating this one is totally sufficient. You are not missing out. Next slide, please. Today, Kara Beatty and I will be walking you through the final implementation plan for updated EPEAT criteria. And the goal of the session really is to provide an overview of the plan and answer any questions you might have. Please also know that because the plan is now considered final, we will not be accepting any additional feedback on it at this time. Next slide, please. So today I am first going to provide some context and background regarding the criteria revision process that is currently underway. I will then walk through the consultation process we undertook to develop the implementation plan and speak to some key principles that guided our decision-making process throughout before looking at key dates in the actual implementation plan itself. I will then provide an overview of the climate change mitigation early adopter status before handing it over to Kara to discuss other critical implementation elements. And that will then leave plenty of time at the end to answer any questions you may have. Next slide, please. Now, as many, if not all of you probably know by now, GEC is currently in the middle of a multi-year initiative to update its EPEAT criteria to align with priority sustainability impacts of electronic products and their supply chains. More specifically, we are doing this to ensure the criteria meet purchaser demands for an increased focus on climate change and supply chains, address sustainability impacts consistently across product categories, and respond to rapid changes in both technology and market trends. For those of you joining us today who may not be as familiar with GEC, or the Global Electronics Council, is a nonprofit organization that owns and manages the EPEAT eco-label, which we are proud to say is used by more purchasers of electronics than any other eco-label worldwide. Next slide, please. EPEAT establishes criteria that address priority sustainability impacts throughout the life cycle of the product, based on an evaluation of scientific evidence and international best practices. And it is these criteria that are currently under revision. Now, previously, criteria were developed separately for each product category. However, GEC is now moving away from this product category approach, and instead, criteria are currently being developed in a modular or horizontal format by sustainability impact areas. And these include climate change mitigation, sustainable use of resources or circularity, reduction of chemicals of concern, and corporate ESG performance. When the criteria are complete, these updated criteria from each impact area will be applied across all EPEAT product categories, starting with computers and displays, imaging equipment, mobile phones, servers, and televisions. Now, please know that although the criteria are going to be revised in a modular format, once all of the criteria are published, GEC will compile a single criteria document for each product category that many of you have come to expect. So you will still have a single standalone criteria document for computers and displays, for example. Development of the updated criteria is still underway, with all criteria expected to be published this year. Climate change mitigation criteria will be published first, and those are expected to be finalized by the end of March. Next slide, please. GEC undertook extensive stakeholder consultation throughout 2022. And as you can see here in the graphic on the screen, it involved outreach to participating manufacturers, GEC-approved conformity assurance bodies, or CABs, purchasers, and other EPEAT stakeholders. From May to July 2022, GEC sought feedback and suggestions on a first draft of the implementation plan via individual calls, as well as meetings with broader groups, including the Conformity Guidance Group and the Advisory Council. Then in August, GEC began refining that original plan based on the preliminary feedback that had been received. We then re-engaged stakeholders to solicit comments on a revised implementation plan through the remainder of the year. Stakeholder feedback was a crucial element in developing a balanced implementation plan, especially considering the diverse range of views expressed on key transition issues. We really are very appreciative of all of the stakeholders who engaged with us in the development of the plan, and a big thank you to anyone on this call who may have contributed. Next slide, please. As a Type 1 eco-label operating in accordance with the principles of ISO 14024, we obviously don't make decisions regarding implementation plans for revised criteria lightly. And to that end, GEC identified basic overarching principles to guide the development of the implementation plan to ensure that all options were examined in a balanced manner that also aligned with the EPEAT program's responsibilities and requirements as a Type 1 eco-label. Our thinking was really driven by a desire to develop a plan that can be consistently applied and easy to understand. Transparency and impartiality really do underpin how we operate the EPEAT program more broadly, and those principles also applied to the approach we took in developing the plan. As a result, GEC's decisions were guided by a commitment to being fair, objective, and transparent. And it was also important to GEC that the implementation plan not provide preference to a single product category, product type, or participating manufacturer. GEC really did rely on these basic principles that you can see here on the screen to guide the decision-making process and balance a variety of competing interests in developing this plan in a credible and objective way. Next slide, please. Now that brings us to the implementation plan itself. Before I really get into this, please just note that the items numbered 1 through 4 in the table correspond to the numbers in the chart image below it, just to help everyone visualize the implementation schedule a little bit easier, since it does span across several years. So what you are seeing here are screenshots from the implementation plan document that was published in January. That PDF document that was circulated last month is final. So in other words, please know that there isn't any new information being presented here today. What you see on the screen are the same dates contained in the document we issued last month. We really heard from many stakeholders a very strong desire to have certainty and clarity on the path forward. And for that reason, the implementation schedule and plan will not be adjusted. The final criteria are expected to be published throughout this year in a staggered fashion, and participating manufacturers will be able to access the back end of the registry for all criteria by roughly September 2024. Between the time the criteria are published and September 2024, CABs and participating manufacturers will be working together on necessary conformity assurance activities, including documentation review. The public EPEAT registry will then launch on April 1st, 2025, when products meeting the updated criteria from all sustainability impact areas will become visible. New products can be registered against the old criteria until this time. However, all active products must meet the updated criteria by December 31st, 2025. After this date, products registered against the old criteria will be archived. There really were a variety of diverse viewpoints to balance, including purchasers' strong desire to begin procuring products that meet the updated criteria as soon as possible, and the reality of long product development cycles. Because of that extensive stakeholder consultation process we undertook in developing this schedule, we do believe it strikes a fair balance and will ensure a successful transition to the updated criteria. As I've already mentioned, the criteria will be released by module when they are final. And because they are all at different points in the development process, they will be released in a staggered fashion throughout the year, with climate change criteria published first. Next slide, please. All right, having just covered the implementation schedule, I'm going to pivot now to speak about the early adopter status. Now, before I really do dig into what early adopter status is, I do think it's important to touch on why we developed it in the first place. One of the fundamental reasons for updating EPEAT criteria is to meet purchaser demands for an increased focus on climate change in supply chains. As you've already heard, we are anticipating that the climate change mitigation criteria will be published next month. And since products won't have to meet the new criteria until 2025, the early adopter concept provides participating manufacturers an opportunity to proactively address purchaser and policymaker demands to help drive climate change impact reductions now, instead of waiting until 2025. Since addressing purchaser demands for an increased focus on climate change is one of the key drivers for the entire criteria revision process, we believe it is tremendously important to make this option available in the interim. In fact, we've already heard from purchasers, and they like the idea of early adopters and will be looking for ways to incorporate it into their procurements. To that end, the early adopter concept will allow EPEAT to meet these stakeholder demands for EPEAT registered products that further reduce climate change impacts and also provide incentives for and recognition to those brands that are the first movers. Lastly, we also firmly believe that the new climate change mitigation criteria will be leading edge, and so allowing manufacturers to become early adopters of these groundbreaking criteria will firmly position EPEAT as the leading global eco-label for electronics even further. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to touch on some key aspects of the early adopter status concept so that all of you have a better sense as to what it entails. In a nutshell, early adopter status can be achieved by individual products as opposed to manufacturers. It's entirely optional, so there will be no requirement whatsoever for manufacturers to achieve early adopter status. To actually achieve it, a product must meet all required climate change mitigation criteria. And to do that, manufacturers will have to work with their CAB to demonstrate conformance. It's also important to mention that early adopter status will not affect a product's tier level of bronze, silver, or gold. This really is essentially an additional badge and has no bearing on the tier. And lastly, products will keep their early adopter status until they are no longer active in the registry. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see key dates for the rollout of early adopter status. And again, you'll note that the items numbered 1 through 5 in the table coincide with the bulleted items in the chart below. So as you can see, training and resources will be made available to CABs and manufacturers by April 30th, which means they can officially begin working on the climate change mitigation criteria by May 1st of this year. However, unofficially, they could start working on it as soon as the criteria are published. In July, manufacturers will be able to access the back end of the registry for climate change mitigation criteria to begin making selections. And on September 30th, early adopter status will appear in the registry. Lastly, the cutoff date for achieving early adopter status is March 30th, 2025, which coincides with the public launch of all criteria on April 1st. This means manufacturers can achieve early adopter status for their products from September 30th, 2023 through March 30th, 2025. On April 1st, 2025, products meeting new criteria from all impact areas will be visible in the registry. So at that point, new products would no longer be able to obtain early adopter status, but any that had achieved it would maintain that status until the product is archived. One other thing I'd like to speak to regarding early adopters is just that we want to make sure early adopters are easy to find and that they are really front and center on the EPEAT registry. So we do plan on incorporating several ways to search for products that have achieved early adopter status. They will be easy to find on the EPEAT registry from multiple paths. And just as importantly, we also plan to include information about what early adopter status is to help educate purchasers and other stakeholders so that they clearly understand what early adopter status means and what it doesn't mean, which is often just as important. Now, with that overview of the plan and early adopter status out of the way, I'm going to hand it over to Kara to speak to other critical transition issues.
Thanks, Catherine. We know that everyone is focused on the schedule, but there are many other activities that are just as important for a smooth and seamless transition from a conformity assurance standpoint. We've given a lot of thought to these items and how they should be managed, including consistency, transparency, objectivity, and efficiency being essential considerations. For supporting resources, the feedback we received during the consultation period was generally supportive of staggering the resources alongside the staggering of the criteria development and publication, as Catherine mentioned. We received great suggestions on information that should be included in resources. The EPEAT program will develop conformity resources for each criterion approximately within 2 months of publication of the criteria for each module. The actual schedule may differ based on the number and complexity of criteria. Resources will include information such as comparison of old and new criteria, examples, previous questions and answers, and additional information not specifically identified in verification requirements. We'll also be developing templates for supplier letters and declarations. ISO 14024 Type 1 ecolabels requires that any declarations of conformity follow guidelines set in ISO 17050. EPEAT will provide templates, and manufacturers will not be required to use those templates, but all content in the template must be incorporated into whatever format is used by the manufacturer or supplier. Resources will be available on the back end of the registry. An on-demand training for CAB auditors and participating manufacturers will be available approximately 2.5 months after publication of the criteria for each module. CAB auditors must pass training and exams for each module to be qualified to perform documentation review and continuous monitoring activities. Training will incorporate more examples wherever possible and provide details beyond what is just stated in the criterion. Auditors must complete the auditor training and achieve 75% or higher on the corresponding exam to complete documentation review. Auditors can and should do their training as soon as it is available. EPEAT is always available to support both CABs and participating manufacturers during documentation review. CABs can help participating manufacturers with questions as soon as the criteria are published before completing training, but must complete the training to officially conduct documentation review. Our plan for continuous monitoring was developed to balance the need of all stakeholders. So we have the schedule for the next 3 years on the screen. So for level 2 product testing rounds in 2023 and 2024, these rounds will start in the first quarter against the existing criteria. In 2025, the level 2 product testing round will start a bit later in the year in order to assess products against the updated criteria. And then we will also conduct level 0 rounds, which are rounds assessing publicly available information. In 2023 and 2024, we will conduct these to the existing criteria, and in 2025 to the updated criteria. Many times, level 0 investigations are inconclusive because the information can be hard to find. It might be on an account protected page, or you need a product serial number or something else to access the data. The EPEAT program will follow up on inconclusive level 0 investigations to ensure information is available. If publicly available information cannot be found, level 1 investigations will be initiated along with the schedule shown on the screen. No matter how much effort goes into making the criteria as objective and easy to understand as possible, there will always be questions that arise. We want to ensure these are answered as quickly as possible while making sure we're including appropriate stakeholders when needed. Therefore, the EPEAT program will develop and publish a question and answer document available to participating manufacturers and CABs. This will be updated at the same time each week to identify newly answered questions that have arisen. To work with CABs directly, we will continue to hold monthly CAB calibration meetings with all CABs to review questions that arise during conformity assurance activities. Some questions we may be able to answer without external feedback. However, for those that we do need external support and feedback on, we've pre-scheduled monthly conformity guidance group meetings for the remainder of 2023. Registration links for all of these meetings are available on the EPEAT announcements page and linked here. The conformity guidance group is open to all stakeholders, including manufacturers, CABs, and purchasers. It is not a standing committee and there are no standing members. Therefore, you may register for any or all of the meetings for the remainder of the year. Currently, each meeting is scheduled in one time slot to bring all attendees together. However, additional times may be added to a monthly meeting depending on the topics to be discussed. And then the last critical implementation activity I want to talk to you about is manufacturers using more than one CAB. So just a bit of background on what this means. Except for consumables, product energy efficiency, and some criteria with small differences in language for different product types, the criteria will be identical across the computers and displays, imaging equipment, mobile phones, servers, and televisions product categories. Product registration and listings on the EPEAT registry will remain by product category. So participating manufacturers may choose to use different CABs for different categories. For example, a different CAB for computers and displays and a different CAB for imaging equipment. There are corporation level criteria in the updated criteria where evidence is required to cover all the product categories which the manufacturer has EPEAT registered products. We needed to identify a process for these corporation level criteria for participating manufacturers that want to use or choose to use different CABs for different product categories. If a participating manufacturer uses different CABs for different product categories, they may choose one of the following options. The participating manufacturer selects a single CAB, which will complete documentation review of all corporation level criteria. All continuous monitoring investigations for the corporation level criteria will be implemented by this CAB. The participating manufacturer has both CABs complete, option 2 is the participating manufacturer has both CABs complete documentation review of the corporation level criteria. The continuous monitoring investigations will be implemented on a product category basis by the CAB for the product category, depending on the product category that is investigating that criterion at the time. So with that, we do have some resources available on this last page before we open up to questions. So the final implementation plan, our website on the transition, and the development schedule are linked here. I'll stop the recording if anyone has any questions.